In this video, we're going to take a look at the basic takeoff procedure for the Cessna 152. Now, this is just continuing from where we left off last time. Our aircraft is at a really good spot. We're basically hogging the whole runway to ourselves here, ready to roll. In the normal world, we want to be talking on the radio the entire time, announcing our intentions as well as where we're going and everything along those lines. But hey, we're skipping some of those details today because we're not worried about it too much. So a couple things we want to do before we take off. The first thing we want to do is we want to double check to make sure our lights are set correctly. So in our case, we have our bacon light on, which is a good thing. It means we're pretty much ready to go. If it's for nighttime, we'd flip on the nav light. The strobe light is also a great thing to use at night because it makes you very visible at long distances. A lot of people like to flick on the landing light. Technically, we don't need it for this time of day or this type of aircraft. So it's up to you whether or not you want to use that expensive bulb up. Again, totally your choice there. Second thing we normally would do in the real world is run the engine up. We don't have to worry about that too much in this particular aircraft. So I'm not going to go through the whole part of setting it to 1800 RPM and basically zigging through it. Again, we're trying to keep things as simple as possible here. So this is, again, kind of important. One thing we do want to do, though, is we want to make sure our transponder is set to altitude mode. The easy way to remember this is lights, camera, and then, of course, action when it's time to get rolling. Next, we want to do is we want to check to make sure the approach is clear, that there's no angry airplanes that are about to land right on top of us. That would be very embarrassing. And after that, we want to make sure we're on the right runway, which we are. We don't need any special clearance or anything like that. So let's go ahead and get going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to release the parking brake, give it just a teeny bit of gas, and we're going to go ahead and get rolling here. Beautiful. All right. Now, the first time I took off in the real world, it was a little nerve-wracking. I was really surprised with how hard you have to pull back on the controls in order to get going. But the reason I had to work so much harder at it is because I did not set my trim correctly. So let's go ahead and take a look at that trim real quick. I'm going to go ahead and set my parking brake one more time. Now, this aircraft has a special little tab on the tip of the elevator right here called a trim tab. What that does is allows us to relieve control pressures in certain modes of flight. So one of the things we want to do is we want to make sure that our trim is set to make it so that our control forces aren't too strong for takeoff. So in this case, this is our trim wheel. We can actually grab it and crank it. Or if you bound it to a joystick, which I highly recommend doing, you can actually go ahead and adjust it that way. In this case, I'm just going to throw it right to the takeoff position, and now I'm ready to go with my pitch trim. I'll go ahead and reset my view once again, and that is all set and ready for takeoff. So how do we take off? So my technique, I use the old school method, the short flight mode. I'm going to go ahead and leave the flaps in the up position. Our runway is not nearly short enough to need flaps for this one. Some people would tell you to always use one click of flaps. If you want to do that, you can just go ahead and slap them down to 10 degrees and you're in good shape. A neat rule of thumb, by the way, with flaps is if you ever look at the outside of where the wing is, if you were to tilt your controls all the way, if your flap angle matches how far your aileron tips down, then you've picked the right flaps for takeoff. If you ever wanted to know, just kind of a quick and kind of sneaky way to do that. I find that it works really well for me. All right, let's go ahead and get this thing started. So my parking brake is going to be off. I'm going to hold the regular brakes down. I'm going to go ahead and smoothly apply power. You don't want to jam on it too hard here. Again, these engines are expensive. Once you get up to full power, release the brakes and immediately expect the aircraft to pull to the left. That is not unusual. That is because you have a giant torque effect now. We start ripping down the runway. Again, use just your feet. This doesn't do much for you when you're still accelerating. Once you see a speed of about 50, go ahead and gently pull back on the yoke. And you're going to want to leave the ground as smoothly as possible. As soon as you get in the air, you want to associate yourself with either your VX or your VY. That is your maximum angle climb versus your maximum speed climb. Now, in this particular aircraft, the best speed to climb at is right around 70 knots. So what I'm doing now is I'm pulling back just enough on the controls so that I don't go faster than 70, but I'm also not going like this and letting myself go over 70. The relationship between pitch and speed is so critical in aviation, and it's one of those things you're going to be looking out for all the time. So now what I can do is I can actually start to trim the aircraft off in order to make it so I don't have to pull back on the controls. Got a pretty good amount of buffeting today, nothing too scary. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to use my pitch trim up command, my elevator trim up command, to go ahead and set it up so that I don't have to mess with the controls in order to hold the nose at this position. Now this is something we'll talk about a little bit later on when we're looking at cruise flight. Now, if you're working with a more powerful aircraft, it's usually recommended after takeoff to go ahead and reduce power or reduce RPM. I'm not going to worry about that today. But what I am going to do is take a quick little tiny turn here and go take a look back at the airport that we just took off from. Again, this is Windham, Connecticut. That little stuttering, I believe, is caused from streaming from the Microsoft servers because everything else is running pretty good right now. All right, there is where we took off from, and there's where we'll continue. Enjoy.